includes the elevator and other support structures. And at the top of the gantry, off to the right, you see that swing arm, which will be the gangway that the astronauts will walk across in order to board the rocket.
Blast danger area. Now, before any pad technicians, engineers, or astronauts enter that area around the launch pad, the SpaceX and NASA teams do an internal go, no-go poll to make sure everything is clear.
This storied launch pad, which has been the beginning point for so many firsts, is the perfect backdrop for today's historic launch that marks a new first and a new era in human spaceflight.
And here's a view from our gantry near the Launch Complex 39A. We've got another view of the convoy going by here. If I had to count up all the cameras we have all over the place for this, I'd be here all day.
That's a beautiful shot right there, looking at the Kennedy Space Center and Merritt Island and all of the nature around us. It's a big buffer from 39A so that we can be safe and launch our rockets off to space safely.
Absolutely. And a lot of people don't realize this is a national wildlife refuge. I mean, I pass turtles on the way to my car every day.
Yeah. Well, when we would run from the operations and checkout building, we'd have to watch out for snakes and for alligators, and so to be really careful about the wildlife.
We used to have one who lived at 39A.
Oh, really?
Yeah, an alligator.
Well, maybe we'll see him. We'll keep an eye out. Tweet at us if you see any.
Did you name him Worm?
Ooh, ahead of my time.
I don't know how an alligator would feel about being called Worm, Leland.
Yeah, well.
And we've got a ton of you following along on social media. Lynn says, as a fellow Missourian, we're so proud of Bob. Launch America, we will be watching from the Space Coast, cheering loud. And another comment, Godspeed and good luck, Astro Benkin and Astro Doug, hashtag Launch America. There you see the SpaceX horizontal integration facility. It's on the left of the screen now. We saw the front of it from the other angle. Or I'm sorry, no, there it is. I was getting my buildings mixed up, so it's on the right now. Yeah, bigger building.
The other is the Falcon Support Building. It's where all of our offices are, and yes, you're correct.
Thank you for the correction, Laura.
There's our hangar. We process Falcon Heavy in there. There are other boosters in that hangar as well. And the rocket and Dragon that is on the pad right now was put together, or rather finally integrated inside of that hangar and then rolled out to that pad to go up vertical.
And there it is. That shot really gives you a sense of the scale of the Falcon 9 rocket. Those Teslas look teeny, teeny, tiny, making their way up there. And so as they make their way up to the pad, we're going to throw it over now to Hawthorne, where Jesse and Dan are watching the action. Hi, guys.
Of the rocket.
Another pretty key upgrade is the Dragon's new life support system. As you can imagine, flying humans requires keeping a habitable environment throughout the entire flight, and that means covering everything like providing breathing air, keeping the capsule at a safe pressure, keeping it free of contaminants, removing any carbon dioxide in the air, regulating the temperature, the humidity, all of these things, and also implementing that waste collection system, aka the toilet.
That sounds pretty important. The changes to Falcon 9 were small but extremely meaningful to meet NASA's requirements for safety for human spaceflight. And specifically, SpaceX had to prove a high degree of fault tolerance, meaning that small failures in the system would not lead to mission failure. Falcon 9 was already able to handle engine failure, but new emphasis was put on making sure that a failure throughout any phase of launch would not mean mission failure. And this goes all the way down to latches, control valves, electronics, wiring, and so much more.
All right, well, with the astronauts now on location at Pad 39A, we're going to swing it right back. Marie, Lauren, Leland, take us through the crew making their final steps towards the Dragon spacecraft.
Sure thing. So we are looking again at Launch Complex 39A. Just a few seconds ago, we saw the Tesla carrying Bob and Doug pull up to the launch pad. This is the site of so much history, you guys. This is where Apollo and Saturn V rockets that launched to the moon took astronauts from. I mean, this pad has so much history. Leland, you launched from there. What's it like seeing Crew Dragon and Falcon 9 there with the pad? With all of the visual changes that have been made? I mean, what kind of emotions does this stir up in you?
You know, when we got out of our Astro van, we stepped out and we just looked up to see this vehicle, and it was creaking, it was groaning, it was making noises, it was getting ready for us to enter it, to take us off planet. And you know, you get a chance to take a picture. Sometimes you stand there, you look there, you think about all the training you've done, all the preparation, and again, all the people that have helped you get there. And it's just a solemn, amazing moment for all of us.
And there's another amazing drone shot. Lauren, you explained this a little bit earlier about kind of how SpaceX brings the rocket and capsule vertical. Now that we see it, can you kind of explain that again for folks who maybe missed that?
Yes, of course. Dragon is actually processed a few miles down the road at Area 59, or Dragonland as we like to call it. We then put it on a truck and drive it all the way to the hangar where the rocket is. And so what will happen is we'll then we call it breakover, where the vehicle's up vertical, we'll turn it sideways because the rocket is being processed sideways or horizontal into the hangar, lift it, mate it to Falcon 9, and then roll up those hangar doors and essentially pull the vehicle in the transporter erector, which is the big white truss structure that you see there. Mm-hmm. All the fluid lines, electrical lines, and everything are connected to the vehicles via the TE, transporter erector. And they basically roll it up those rails. You can't really see them. You kind of see them in the screen, those rails. Mm-hmm. Roll the entire TE Rocket Dragon assembly up to the very top of the pad, pin it into the pad systems, and then roll it up vertical.
And we are about T-minus 2 hours, 57 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. In just a couple of minutes, we are expecting to hear a formal announcement that the crew is at the pad. Of course, we saw them pull up in the Teslas, and there they are. Looks like they've already gotten out of the car, and they are walking up to the elevator that will carry them all the way up to the 255-foot level, and then they'll have a couple of steps to get up to the level where the crew access arm is.
I have the AC/DC song in my head as I see them walking up.
You know what I was kind of jamming out to on my way in was ZZ Top, Sharp Dressed Man.
Oh, nice.
I was like, I don't know, that might be on my playlist if I were in there. There they are, taken in the sight, craning to see the top of the Falcon 9 rocket. It's 230 feet tall if you round up, and then Crew Dragon is another 27 feet from the bottom of the trunk to the top of the nose cone. So when you're out there in person, it's really hard to describe just how large it is.
Look at them getting excited. They're ready to get in the vehicle, get in the elevator, and make it to the top. There's some FOD. He's picking up foreign object debris.
Appreciate that. They're also wearing FOD covers on their shoes, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We want to make sure that they don't, track the inside of Dragon when they go in. And so right before they enter the vehicle, they'll remove the FOD covers off of their boots.
You take for granted, all just the little details like that, all of the thought and preparation that has to go into literally every single piece of this operation.
I love the makeover of Pad 39A with the sleek black with the white ticking and the lines, and it's a very futuristic look for this iconic launch pad, and to think what's been there before with Mercury, Gemini, Apollo shuttle, and now the SpaceX Crew Dragon getting ready for a launch to the International Space Station. Rocket fuel still going through my veins.
And we feel so honored to be able to launch from here. Oh, here they are. That's a really fast elevator.
Yeah.
I know it really zips. That took them up to 255 feet in just a matter of seconds.
They were removing their fog covers.
Looks like they were just maybe checking something on his boot or leg.
And we should hear a call any moment that the crew has arrived at the pad as they make their way up the stairs, and they're headed to the crew access arm now. There's the worm again, popping.
You know it.
Meatball.
Don't worry, there's a meatball on Crew Dragon.
Those white arrows you see there are essentially illuminating the way for anyone who's up there to find their way to the escape baskets in the event of an emergency that would require them to get far away from the rocket and the pad.
And it's hard to tell from this angle, but there's actually a phone right here, and I can't tell if it's Bob or Doug that's using the phone right now. But Leland, can you explain the significance of that? It's the same phone that was there during the shuttle days.
Yeah, you get a chance to talk to maybe friends or family that you haven't had maybe couldn't come to the launch. In this case, it's quite a few people, but just to have that last moment to talk to someone before you get in the vehicle. It's a beautiful view.
And we're watching the crew when they're done using the phone there. We expect them to be making their way into the crew access arm. And coming up at about T minus 2 hours and 35 minutes, the astronauts will ingress, or that's a word we use to describe climbing into Crew Dragon. And we saw Doug do it a couple minutes early on Wednesday. They were a little bit ahead of schedule, so that time could be a little bit flexible. But that's going to happen with the assistance of the suit techs, and they will get strapped into their seats. And so with that coming up, we're going to head over to Hawthorne for a preview of what's in store for the future in space travel. Jesse?
We've been listening to NASA's feed of narrating what is going on the swing arm on the pad at the moment. They will eventually be throwing out to Hawthorne, California, the headquarters of SpaceX, to show some of what's going on out there. At the moment, we see Bob Behnken removing the foreign object debris shoes from his boots that prevent them from tracking any foreign object, any dirt into this pristine new spacecraft. It's sort of like taking off your galoshes before you come into the house. The astronauts are about to cross that swing arm and then enter the spacecraft. You can see over that NASA meatball logo on the wall what looks like a little bit of graffiti. That is where the astronauts signed their names, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, before boarding last Wednesday. This is the beginning of a new crew tradition in this new White Room. And this, by the end of SpaceX's at least 6 missions to the ISS, that wall is going to be pretty full of signatures. You saw something similar in the walkout scenes when they were leaving through the double doors during the walkout to the vans that take the astronauts to the launch pad. You could notice over the doors dozens and dozens of crew stickers, crew patches, each one indicating a crew, whether from the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, or shuttle eras that have walked through those doors and gone to the launch pads. This marks a new tradition, autographing the walls of the White Room before boarding the spacecraft. The spacecraft they're getting into now, the Dragon, is it's a young machine. It's a machine that's carrying humans for the first time, but it has a pretty robust history. There have been 22 Dragon launches so far, with 21 visits to the International Space Station. The spacecraft is capable of seating up to 7 people, which is was the capacity and the maximum capacity of the much larger shuttle. It stands almost 27 feet tall and 13 feet wide. That's about the same width as the Apollo crew vehicle, but it's 2.5 times the height and the habitable capacity that the Apollo had. It is maneuvered in space by 16 Draco thrusters. Those are the thrusters that allow it to change its orientation and attitude in space. On the way back down, it descends under the power of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 main parachutes, as you can see in the footage here. It is a pretty adaptable system. We see it right now configured for just 2 astronauts, but again, it can hold as many as 7. The Falcon 9 rocket, on top of which the Dragon will launch today, stands 229 feet tall. It's fueled by 9 Merlin engines. SpaceX has an interesting technique for building rockets. Basically, they go by the more is more philosophy. Their very first rocket, the Falcon, had a single Merlin engine. The Falcon 9, as the name suggests, has 9 engines. The Falcon Heavy, which is one of the heaviest lift rockets flying today, has 3 clusters of 9 or 27 Merlin engines. Each one of those engines is capable of producing 125,000 pounds of thrust. So for this rocket that'll be launching today, it will be exerting the equivalent of 1,125,000 pounds of thrust overall. It runs on RP1 rocket fuel, which sounds very fancy, but is in fact simply a highly technical way of saying refined kerosene. And it also uses liquid oxygen as the oxidizer. This will be the 84th launch of a Falcon 9 rocket since the very first launch on June 4th, 2010. And one great innovation of the SpaceX design system is that first stage is not expendable. The first stage of the rocket can be reused when it is jettisoned from the rest of the spacecraft after its fuel has been spent. It doesn't simply tumble into the ocean. Instead, it lands on a barge in the ocean to be refurbished and used again. So far, there have been 44 successful landings of a Falcon first stage on an ocean barge, and 31 of those stages have been refurbished and reflown. This is one way of keeping costs down and keeping the production lines moving quickly. Today's launch is the result of more than 10 years of development of the Commercial Crew Program. The initial idea was to allow NASA simply to purchase services of private companies that would fly crew to and from the International Space Station, freeing the space agency up to focus on its longer-term ambitions to explore deeper space, going to the moon, going then later on to Mars. Here we're seeing when the first commercial crew announcements were made, the crews were introduced. There are two companies that will be flying crews to and from the International Space Station, SpaceX, and unmentioned so far today, but very much in the game, is Boeing, which will be flying its Starliner spacecraft. It has one more uncrewed test sometime in the next 2 or 3 months, and then it has another crewed test sometime early in 2021. The astronauts and SpaceX have been through a lot of stages to get to this point. They successfully flew a pad abort test, which is what we're seeing right here. A test of the launch escape system that pulls the capsule away from a booster that may be flying awry or may be about to explode. The Gemini, old Gemini spacecraft used ejection seats. The Apollo and Mercury spacecraft used something very much like this. What you're seeing here is what would happen if a rocket began to blow up and the SpaceX crew compartment or the Dragon crew compartment would simply separate and then descend into the Atlantic safely for a quick recovery. This was one of their bigger successes, this pad abort test. They similarly flew a launch abort test in which they actually deliberately destroyed a Falcon 9 on the way up in order to test whether the spacecraft could safely get away from a rocket that was in danger of exploding. The company did ace that test as well. The escape system was proven. It showed that the astronauts could indeed be pulled safely away from an exploding vehicle. We see that happening now. That small dot toward the center of your screen is the crew compartment escaping. Now, not all has gone well. This explosion right here was deliberate. That was supposed to simulate a rocket that had gone awry. Not all has gone well. There have been some stumbles. During one of the pad abort tests in 2019, the spacecraft itself exploded on the launch pad, which is a very bad sign. And there was no denying the fact that that was a setback. Here is another setback from 2016 when one of the rockets was being fueled on the launch pad and exploded. We just saw that's a crash of one of the first stages as it was trying to land on a barge, failing to land. There were no injuries in any of these cases, fortunately. And as recently as yesterday in Boca Chica, Texas, where the SpaceX Starship is being designed, the 120-foot tall stainless steel rocket that Elon Musk hopes to use to get to the moon and then later on to Mars, there was a static fire test on the launch pad just yesterday, and there was another explosion. It was a poorly timed accident one day before